everyone. Thanks so much for joining, and thank you, Jay, for the introduction. So I'm here to talk about the implications and economic component of the drug trade in Tajikistan, and I'm very excited to share this with you, as this is something that I lived and breathed for about a year, not literally. Um, but anyway, so I would be more than happy to take questions and comments at the end of it, and in fact encourage it. I'm always interested in hearing about what others' experiences are in this field. It's a pretty understudied field as of right now, I feel. Um, and what I'm going to be doing is sharing data with you, mostly compiled from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, where I was working, but also from other international organizations and some perspective given, accepted as general knowledge by the community studying this topic. So as James mentioned, I was there for about a year researching the drug trade as a Fulbright Research Fellow. And so while living there, I was in Dushanbe working at the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, which will be referred to throughout this presentation as UNODC. And I also enjoyed support from the U.S. Embassy and some other international organizations working in this field. So I was very fortunate. I had a wonderful experience and exposure to the region and this particular topic. So I'm going to start by introducing Tajikistan briefly to offer some context to the issue at hand, and just sort of, I want you all to leave this with a broad concept of what the drug trade means economically for Tajikistan. And so I really like this map because it's I'll start with Tajikistan is a country with a population just shy of 7 million people. National language is Russian, national language is Tajik, excuse me, but Russian is still widely spoken since it's a post-Soviet country, and it's widely used in government and business. So, and you'll see, I really like this map because it shows the cities and main points along the border here. And this is where most of the aid and infrastructure development goes for border operations. Here's Dushanbe, where I spent most of my time, although I was fortunate enough to be able to travel all throughout, which is not much because this entire country is about the size of Wisconsin. Thank you, CIA World Factbook, for the perspective. But it actually seems like much more because it's a very, very mountainous country, and so to get from point A to point B is, is much more involved and logistically challenging than Wisconsin. So this is the Gorno-Badakhshan region right here. Very, very, very mountainous, sparsely populated, and still feeling, the entire country still is feeling the effects of civil war that broke out after the collapse of the Soviet Union that led to the independence of Tajikistan. It's still recovering. It's still in post-conflict recovery mode, arguably, and it's this. So it's in the process. There are still some internal struggles, but for the most part, Tajikistan has stayed stable for the past for the years that it's been independent. So the Civil War lasted between 1992 and 1997, and at which point the current president, Emomali Rahmon, came into power and has consolidated and maintained stability and kept it ever since. So I want to point some attention to this region specifically because this is where international organizations and Tajik law enforcement generally say speculate that the drugs go through because it's sparsely regulated, because of the extreme living conditions along the border and in this entire region, really. But the famous northern route get it up through Tajikistan and move up and get it into Kyrgyzstan and get, if you can successfully get it to Osh, that's the destination point. So again, regulatory-wise and law enforcement-wise, this seems like the best route, and this is the generally accepted route. But I'd like to also point out something that this map doesn't show, and that's the elevation here in Afghanistan, which is in the Badakhshan region of Afghanistan, which is about the same as here, and it would be a logistical nightmare to traffic or even travel without trafficking or having very much cargo. So I just want you to hold that thought, and I'll come to that, revisit that later. So moving on to the next slide. Here you'll see the border is outlined in red. This is the Afghan-Tajik border, and it's and again the autonomous Gorno-Badakhshan province here, and it's also commonly referred to as the roof of the world because of the some of the highest peaks in the world are located here. It's the Pamir Mountain region, and the border itself is marked by the Amu Darya and Panj rivers, and they're frequently crossed by traffickers either by walking, swimming, or using self-made rafts even sometimes. So here's a photo I took of one of our missions. We had just stopped along the way, and just to demonstrate how this was not the most shallow point either along the route. This was just a very small, shallow point, and I just wanted to show how certainly not easy. Easy is not the word that I want to describe, but logistically challenging, but easy in the sense that you could cross undetected and make it to the other side. This is Afghanistan right here. So in theory, and so I'll point out that the elevation on this side is very flat, and you have an airport, you have some more developed border enforcement, more involved law enforcement in the border management here. Again, I will revisit that point in a while. I just want you to keep that thought. So now I want to move on to talk about the economic situation of Tajikistan, since it's absolutely paramount to understand the current state of the economy to fully appreciate the drug trade. So 40 to 50% of their GDP is estimated to come from migrant labor workers who are in Russia, Kazakhstan, China even, and Dubai sometimes. Just almost all of their labor force goes abroad for work. About 10 to 15% of it is speculated to come from the aluminum industry, and a wide-ranging estimate of 30 to 50%, depending on which organization you talk to, are profits from the narcotics trade. Now, a very small percentage is from the agriculture industry, and an interesting point I want to make here is that there is no, or at least very little known, opium production in Afghanistan, or in Tajikistan, excuse me. And it's because Tajikistan is a transit country. It's a conduit through which the Afghan heroin goes north. And one last point I'd like to make to demonstrate the weak state of the economy is that it's the world's most dependent country on foreign remittances. And so it puts it at a very vulnerable spot to really any industry or influence. So that said, I'll revisit the point that it is a transit country, because from my experience, and I traveled all along the border areas and went on several missions with different organizations and met with different people and talked to a lot of other people studying the same topic. And from my experience, citizens harbor a very casual attitude towards the drug market because they see it as a means of sending their children to school, putting food on the table, and even sometimes funding trips abroad to find work elsewhere. So it's and actually in an interaction with a drug trafficker who played a very minor role in the grand scheme of things, he was posed the question, have you ever used opium or heroin products? And his response, he responded in a very stupefied manner and was like, why would I use it when I could simply take it up to Osh, Kyrgyzstan, and sell it for many years' salary? So I don't want to discount the issue of addiction because that's absolutely still an issue. But as I mentioned before, there's just far more incentive and value attached to the commodity, to opium and heroin as a commodity than to traffic than to consume. So that said, I don't want to say that transit areas are not affected by increasing addiction. That's just an entire issue in and of itself. But just for your information, Red Cross estimates that about 9 to 10 times the amount of drug users it actually exists than are registered. So I'll move on to demonstrate the large role that Afghanistan plays in the world opium market. So they produce approximately 90% of the opium distributed worldwide. Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia is about 5%. Latin America is another 5%. So, and then here, I want to talk about the opium cultivation trend in Afghanistan. And it started before this, and it starts at a lower point, and you'll see it's a gradual increase, with the exception of this year, and increases further with speculation that 2013 will be a record year of production. So that said, I'll visit this point here, where it's noticeably in 2001. It's noticeably lower than any of the other years, and this was where the U.S. intervention came in late 2001. But prior to that, the Taliban had a large opium field eradication campaign, and which devastated the domestic economy and economies in the countries surrounding the region. But also, and the reasons behind it are merely speculations, because I believe. And so, but what it did was definitely control the price. It had effect on the price of the market, and it made it more of a profitable commodity, which, judging by this trend in 2001, I think, and judging by the predicted peak in 2013, I think it would be safe to expect in the next few years a similar trend. Maybe it's not eradication campaigns necessarily, but a trend in a significant drop, I think, would be fair to expect. And also, even if there were, I'd like to point out a significant drop. There is believed to be enough opium stored, judging from the production trends and consumption trends, to satisfy a global demand of about 3 to 4 years. So even if it did substantially drop off, the price would go up dramatically, of course, but the effect wouldn't necessarily be seen. It would still be a gradual increase. So let's see. So I'll talk about the relationship between the Afghan production of opium and then the Tajik seizures of heroin. And you'll notice this is the same chart on top here, with the slight fluctuation but gradual increase in opium cultivation. And below you'll see a chart measuring the Tajik seizures. And in 2001 you have 4.8 metric tons seized. And if you just look at how much that has decreased and continues to decrease. This is 2008, but it continues to decrease. Um, it's a paradox. The production's increasing, Tajik seizures are decreasing, but there's no question that about the same amount or more is going through Tajikistan. So just demonstrating again the economic dependence upon profits from the drug trade of Tajikistan. And next, I'll revisit the relationship between the world opium consumption and production. So you can see here US and Canada play a very large role. Europe does, and Russia as well, in consumption. And the Afghan officials are sort of demanding that there's a more concerted effort to curb the demand of the drug to help them. I mean, and sort of pleading in a way like they have their hands full. Please do something, international community. And at least for a recognition of the relationship between consumption and production. So, and given that, I want to move to some of the obstacles that I observed while working and living there and studying this topic. So, starting with the Tajik law enforcement agencies with counter-narcotics operations, and here's a list of them, and they strive for interagency cooperation and share reports and data periodically, but gaps remain in cooperation of ongoing operations. And furthermore, individual employees of the various agencies seem to harbor very competitive, negative attitudes towards one another, and it's just really not conducive to effective, efficient counter-narcotic operations, and it really undermines the entire thing. And there are ways that I'm going to suggest that this issue get addressed, but for the time being, I'm going to I'll tell you about an experience of mine in traveling throughout the country with I accompanied a UN ODC forensic scientist to survey the forensic capabilities and laboratories of the different agencies within Tajikistan. And this mission just exemplified the gaps in communication and the hostile attitudes, and just it was a little bit discouraging. But some accused others of jeopardizing missions. Others complained about having to pay to use another agency's facilities to analyze their narcotics that they seized, and others were lobbying for funding because they wanted to start up an entirely new forensic department within their agency because they didn't want to collaborate with the others, because there was just so animosity towards there's so much animosity towards one another. So so that is absolutely an issue that could be addressed by designating an umbrella organization of some sort to monitor and evaluate this, or assigning interagency individual assignments. So that being said, it's possible. It's just, and I also need to point out that the border guards, as part of the ones that bear quite a lot of the brunt, are put into very tight, difficult situations. And I'll revisit this slide in just a moment. But they are risking their lives for a monthly salary of about $20. And they often live in extremely remote areas with no cell phone towers, and furthermore, and the responsibility to grow their own food sometimes. And in the winter months, they're oftentimes completely stranded and relying completely on their own resources and devices. So under these circumstances, it's no surprise that the only way to subsist is by means of corruption. And it's an inevitable topic when researching facets of the drug trade. But here I'll point you into the direction of the Transparency International 2012 index that ranks Tajikistan 157 out of 177. And I don't want you to pay too much attention to the numbers or the change from 2012 to 2013, but rather the factors that the IFC takes into consideration in crafting these ranks. So starting a business, dealing with construction permits, electricity, credit, investors, taxes, and trading across borders, etc. So these are the aspects that take into and considering these, Tajikistan ranks in the 9th percentile of most corrupt countries because it's very difficult to do business in. So that being said, the economic component to the drug trade in Tajikistan just cannot be ignored. There's of course the potential, like I said, in hydropower or mineral exploitation and international business, but for now, narcotics are sort of acting as a stabilizing agent, and I think it's very important to consider the fact that in order to move towards other industries in a sustainable manner, it has, with the case of Tajikistan, it has to be a gradual transition from the dependence on the narcotics trade to dependence upon something else. And in order to do that, they need to make some reforms and strive to create a more business-friendly environment and policies. And hopefully with their recent membership in the World Trade Organization, things will start to change toward that, will move toward that direction. So finally, I would like to talk a little bit about what I would recommend. And again, I want to say that holding Tajikistan to its responsibilities as a WTO member, I think will absolutely encourage change and instill confidence in potential international investors. I mean, you have shares that can be sold for hydropower projects and mineral exploitation. They're on the market right now. It's just a matter of shifting the political climate and policies to make it a little bit more open to that. And then also, I think some serious strides need to be done to harmonize the domestic counter-narcotics initiatives because they have the same goal. And the animosity is just undermining all rule, and the corruption issue is something that definitely needs to be addressed as well within this category. It's the salaries, corruption, all moving slowly but surely in that direction, but it's important. I think it's very important to focus on that. And then also an international recognition of the relationship between production and consumption is going to be paramount, because the global demand for it plays a very large role in the constant supply. So and so that's so our overall role in this issue should help to encourage the economy to develop sustainably and take the economic component of the drug trade into consideration and move gradually away from it into other markets. And thank you all so much for your time. This has been wonderful for me, and I hope you've learned something, and I would love to take some questions now if you have any.
Sure, and thank you very much, Hillary. That was wonderful. While people are gathering up their questions and entering them in the chat box down below, we already have a few here. In reference to the Tajikistan WTO membership, do you know when in 2013 this decision will be made?
It's already been made. I believe it was passed in March, February or March, and so they are now an official member.
Okay, great. A couple questions. Here's one from our own Dr. Jevdet Rekshepi. If Afghanistan is the main refiner of opium into heroin in the region, does Tajikistan do any of its own refining?
So actually, very, very interesting. In my tour of Tajikistan with a UNODC forensic scientist, we learned a lot about through through the narcotics analyses that he's collected from surrounding countries in the region, figured out sort of where most of the refinement happens. And that's actually in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Tajikistan is truly almost purely a transient country. So there have been very, very few, if ever, laboratory seizures of really any scale in Tajikistan.
Okay, and here's one from Dr. Buffington. There's a whole bunch of questions in here, so just be patient with me. Regarding China, did you observe any influence by the PRC in Tajikistan? I mean, and did Beijing seek to influence or arrest opium trafficking in Tajikistan? And then the part B of this is, you note that China accounts for about 12% of the world opium consumption. Is Beijing conducting any of its own interdiction actions?
Yes, absolutely. China's playing a very large role. They are increasing their economic presence there, and absolutely, I think they're one of the largest, becoming one of Tajikistan's largest trading partners. But so the growing influence is absolute. But whether they sought influence to opium trafficking in Tajikistan, I didn't directly observe any of that. I focused mostly on the Afghan-Tajik border. I knew some folks that focused primarily on the Kyrgyz, Tajik, and Chinese Tajik border. But while I was there, the Chinese border with Tajikistan was completely closed. Like there was no travel between. So I'm absolutely not a specialist in that relationship, but I did observe an increasing influence of China within Tajikistan, and they take a little bit more of a war on drugs approach. So an absolute a very aggressive law enforcement means. So that's about as much. I mean, I don't know specifically about corruption within that topic, but that's my answer.
Sure. Here's a question from Mr. Prenslow, the CKC director. You use the term stabilizing agent. In what way does facilitating the drug trade stabilize the economy or the government? Is it simply a revenue stream coming in, or are the drugs just like another commodity, like aluminum or something else?
Well, and I hesitate to say that they are just another commodity like aluminum because they still are illegal. But they're widely perceived in communities along the transit routes as means to an end, as basic, as the only industry they can participate in for to survive. So yeah, but I hesitated to put it on the same level as a legal industry. But yes, it does I say that it stabilizes the economy and the government in the sense that there are no direct links of the drug trade with President Rahmon. However, there have certainly been accusations of senior officials who are complicit in the drug trade by several international organizations and competing law enforcement agencies even. And so there are small issues, I suppose, within that, but overall the profits from the drug trade stabilize the economy because people don't want to revolt against the government because they're making enough to survive. So that's it's a stabilizing agent in the sense that people are fine with paying somebody off to be able to push their cargo through and take those risks for now.
Okay, and this next question by Mr. Allen, very similar, is as the U.S. and more advanced nations of the world try to turn back the handle on criminal activities like drugs, we've noticed that there's a need to be to have solid economic opportunities that can be pursued in place of the drug trade. Do you see any other hopeful or likely alternatives in Tajikistan?
Yes, I do. And while their hydropower is currently posing some diplomatic issues with neighboring downstream Uzbekistan, it would do huge things for Tajikistan's economy, and and so I think investing in something along those lines, ensuring that downstream country Uzbekistan is not going to be disturbed by this, I think that would be very helpful. There's also speculation because not a whole lot of geological exploration has happened because it's been a little bit closed off. It hasn't been it hasn't been the most accessible country. So, but there are people believe that there are minerals to exploit. So, and to start a booming industry potentially even. So, it's absolutely possible. It would just be a very gradual transition.
Sure. And here's another question from Dr. Rexapi. Which are the key actors that dominate the heroin trade in Tajikistan? Is it local or regional actors, or is it more coming from the outside, the global ones like the South American or the European cartels?
Now that is a question that I hope that by presenting this data I can sort of paint a picture for you, because I certainly don't want to make any belligerent or extreme statements one way or the other. But I don't think that they are. I think the Russian and European markets sort of perpetuate the vulnerability of Tajikistan in this regard and contribute to the existence of the market itself, the black market itself. But I don't see any international non-state actors playing a huge role.
Okay, and I think we've got time for just one more question here. And Ms. Merrill down there, it says, how hard is it to buy opium in Tajikistan? I'm sure you're talking about not just for the average person for availability, but as you've touched on, that it's because of the huge advantage of selling it versus using it. How hard is it to buy opium in Tajikistan?
Good question. While I was there, I can't say that I think it's very difficult, actually. While in the interest of my research, I put myself into situations where I was exposed to it, but I didn't seek to buy it on my own or find out how easy it would have been to purchase. There was sort of a line that I drew, sort of being a sensitive topic to talk about with people anyway. I didn't want to make anyone else uncomfortable or myself uncomfortable. So my impression is that it's relatively easy, but many people, again, though, have the end goal of getting it in Tajikistan and trafficking it up to Kyrgyzstan for a profit. So again, there's little incentive to use, but there's also a small incentive to distribute it within Tajikistan, because you can make so much more in Kyrgyzstan.
Great, thank you very much. Do you have any closing thoughts for us?
No, these were wonderful questions. Thank you so much, all of you, for your time and for listening. This was very exciting for me, and I'm so happy to be able to share what I what I studied over the past year and a half or so. So